Hello, Stephen Brooks.
Hello, hi. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you, and thank God. And how are you?
I'm very, very well. It's a bit hot because I'm in Thailand, 40 degrees out there
Wow.
pretty much most of the time at this time of year. And when you have the rainy season as well, what you get is high humidity with that heat. So it's not a comfortable heat. So not the kind of weather you go out in, walk around in. So you tend to stay indoors a lot.
Hmm.
That's
So
apart from that,
I,
it's great here. It's lovely, fantastic country, fantastic place to be. But in terms of temperature, it's not that comfortable. What about Israel at the moment?
to be honest, we have also heat here. It's very hot here, like 33 today.
Mm, mm.
So near by you.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool for Thailand.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. But we are using the air conditioner and everything is fine with that.
Okay. So let's begin. You want me to explain something about who I am and what I've been
Yeah,
doing?
first of all, I want you, to introduce yourself, what you're doing for the last, I
40
don't know
years.
how.
40
Yeah,
years.
40 years. Yeah.
Does it look like it? Do I look like
No,
I'm...
no, definitely no. And I
Uh,
like very much your bed.
oh yeah. Well, you can get one as long if you want. You just
Yeah, I think
don't cut
so.
it. We'll have a
I need a
competition.
permission from my wife.
Oh, really? Just show my photo and you'll convince them.
I will try it. Non-hypnotic.
Okay, well, I was talking to my school teacher 3 days ago. Now, this may sound bizarre because I'm 70 years old, but I'm actually in contact with my school teacher who taught me when I was about the age of 14, 15. And I've been in contact with him for about a year and a half now. And he told me something that I had forgotten, but I responded to, maybe hypnotically. And he told me that when he started teaching the class that I was in, he was so disappointed with the curriculum and the education that the kids were getting at that time. This was in the 1960s, in the mid-60s, 1960s, that he actually told the class and told me that as we were all based in Cambridge, which is a university town, that we should go to Cambridge lectures, even though we were kids. He said, just nobody will notice. You just walk in and sit in a lecture. You can learn so much here rather than the stuff we're having to teach you in the school. And he reminded me of this. And then I said to him, you know something? My whole career, my whole life has been about hypnotherapy. And I've realized it's because of you. I said, because I went into a lecture in one of the colleges and saw a lecture about hypnosis when I was about 14. And I said, I don't remember you telling me this to go into university. He said, oh, I told everybody. I said, well, I responded to it and I have to thank you because it's given me this wonderful life teaching and utilizing hypnosis to help people. So that's where it started. I have to thank my school teacher. So basically as a kid, I saw this demonstration of hypnotherapy or hypnosis. And I just thought, wow, I want to do this as a job. This is fantastic in a university setting. And they must have thought I was the son of the professor or something because nobody said anything to me. And that's where I was interested. So I didn't actually start practicing or studying it really seriously until several years later when I was about 25, because I spent the first part of my life in the music business. And then I looked at books that were available then, and to be honest, they were pretty poor. It was all very direct, authoritarian, traditional hypnosis. And I wasn't impressed with what I saw. And then I managed to pick up a book where one of the authors was Milton H. Erickson. And I opened the book, it was in a library, and his part in the book just jumped off the page. It was, what? Who is this guy? I mean, it was like, they were like neon lights, these letters, these words were just glowing. And I just thought, this completely changes things. Here I can see some secret that I can learn if I read this stuff. So I took the book out of the library, and consequently I ended up contacting Erickson in the States because I was living in England, as I said. and getting papers from him. I did a hypnotherapy course, which was with the main training organization at the time in the UK, and it was terrible. They hadn't even heard of Erickson. So I was very disappointed with that, but at least I had a qualification to practice. I started practicing, continued to get papers from Erickson. And I have to admit, I was really naive because there was no training course. It didn't exist then. And so I'd get a paper from Erickson, and whatever he did in that paper, I would do with every single one of my patients that week.
Wow.
So, which is crazy, you know, because I was very naive. I just thought, well, if he does it, I'm going to do it. So, and that's how I learned. So it was really my patients who taught me how to do Ericksonian hypnotherapy. It was
Amazing.
on the spot, you know, live training every client, you know. So that's how I started. And then later, that was in 1979, I started, 78, 79, I started doing therapy. And then in the 80s, the early 80s, 85, 86, I did the first NLP course that took place in the UK. And I made it known that I'd been practicing Ericksonian hypnotherapy for something like 6 years or something. And it was Robert Dilts who said to me, he said, why don't you teach Ericksonian hypnotherapy? And I thought, okay, I hadn't thought about teaching until that point. He said, no one else seems to know how to do it. And so I have to thank Robert for that. And that's how I started. So I started teaching. And, you know, it was a very different kind of approach to teaching hypnosis because it was indirect Ericksonian.
Yes.
And we managed to work our way into a hospital, St. George's Hospital in South London. And I employed some of the psychologists who worked there and some other psychologists to teach with me. And I just gave them minimal stuff to teach. And I also taught as well. And that was our very first diploma course. And because I was with all of the medical people here, students would come from other hospitals as well and say, oh, can you bring your course to us and us and us and us?
Amazing.
And so it was, it didn't require really any marketing. People just asked us to go. And one of the reasons that the students wanted to do it was because they were being funded by the government. So they didn't have to pay. So you can imagine, there I am with a very successful business, quite surprised at how successful it was. But not really if you look back at it, because nobody had to pay, because the government paid for all of them. So, wow. And that allowed us to introduce the Ericksonian hypnosis into hospitals in areas such as social work, nursing, family therapy, counseling. And none of those particular sectors were using hypnosis prior to that. And because it was indirect and Ericksonian, it wasn't seen as hypnosis as such. It was indirect. So people could use it as part of their profession without kind of anybody kind of really kind of making a fuss about it. So
what makes you fell in love with this magic of Milton Erickson? What's the vibe that you...
It is kind of magic. You can make a difference to someone's life. And you can do so in such a simple way, even without them knowing how you've done it. And for me, I think that's what I was looking for in hypnosis and hypnotherapy. The traditional approach to hypnotherapy is the therapist having the authority and giving commands, the way that the media portrays hypnosis.
Yeah.
And what's that saying? It's saying you can't do it on your own. The patient can't do it. They have to have someone else making them do it, forcing them to quit smoking or whatever. And here was a completely different approach with Erickson, where you would evoke the trance rather than do it to someone. You would evoke it in the patient, and you would get the patient themselves to actually do the therapy. You just kind of guide them into a position where they can do that. And the main difference was, I think, with traditional hypnosis, the hypnotist just talks to the person. But with Erickson, you weren't talking just to the person, you were talking to the client or patient's unconscious mind. And that was the huge difference. Because it's a bit like having the name on the tip of your tongue and you can't remember. You try hard to do it, it doesn't come. But then you stop trying and it comes by itself. Well, that part that's been holding it back and then gives it to you as a present is the unconscious mind. So it's incredibly powerful. And so that was the most important thing about Erickson's work, was addressing that part of the brain that basically monitors all of the systems in the body. and so is in the very best position to help someone heal, whether it's psychologically or even physically.
Mhm. I know that there is a quote or maybe a notion that says about Milton Erickson that when he uses therapy, he uses psychotherapy, and when he do psychotherapy, he uses hypnosis to induce everything.
Yeah, if there's so many ways to describe what hypnosis is, but okay, you can use it as an information gathering tool to evoke information, to get information from a client, from the unconscious. You can use it as a way of producing phenomena. This is hypnotic phenomena that's not consciously normally available to the client. So it's something completely different. And you can use it as an adhesive. By that I mean, it's like everything you say in hypnosis becomes stuck. Like the suggestions, they get stuck. It's as if the trance applies an adhesive over the words. So the patient takes on those words and those suggestions. So trance is like an adhesive. So it's magical. So I think, almost any profession in the caring professions can benefit from using hypnotherapy or hypnosis as part of their work, whether it's if it's a nurse working in a hospice with terminal illness, just to sit by a patient's bed and talk to them hypnotically can bring about pain relief, can bring about dissociation, reduction of fear and anxiety. And it doesn't even have to look like hypnosis because it's just all in the language. So it is magical in a sense.
Yes. So this nurse, for instance, can use hypnosis without the phenomena of it?
Well,
you're saying?
Not without the phenomena, because, what do you mean by phenomena? You mean hypnotic trance? Or do you mean?
I know that when you're hypnotizing someone, he developed a trance, but without the phenomena of the cataleptic, of the amnesia, things like that. So,
yeah. I mean, it's the way I work anyway. The way I work is to work in an indirect way. So people, they start to kind of go inside, and at some point, usually they feel like they want to close their eyes, not always. So it doesn't really matter. And then you start to access their unconscious mind. And it's just a state of increasing comfort and a feeling of safety and trust while you talk with the Ericksonian language patterns. You don't have to evoke hypnotic phenomena at all. I mean, you can suggest anesthesia by telling a story. You don't have to say you cannot feel your hand. On the count of 3, you won't feel your hand, which is the old kind of way of doing hypnosis. You can talk about naturally occurring numbness. Maybe you talk about when you're asleep at night, maybe you've been lying on an arm and you wake up and you can't feel your arm because it's numb. So you tell stories about naturally occurring phenomena. And then what happens, because they're in a trance state, their unconscious mind develops that experience in their arm or their hand. So it can be used in a conversation, if you like. So
basically, you're saying that hypnosis can be beneficial even without the hypnotic phenomena that can develop during the hypnosis?
Yes. I mean, it's a learning. Basically, everything that we experience moment by moment is a learning opportunity and experience. We learn good and bad stuff. If you use trance in which to install new learnings, it becomes more reliable, more likely to occur, and easier to remember, if you like, because of the trance context. If you were at school and you had a horrible teacher, you're not going to be happy, right? You're going to be bored. You're going to be looking out of the window. You're going to be looking at everybody. You're not going to want to pay any attention. You're not going to enjoy the experience. So there's no way later you want to remember that, because it's an unpleasant experience. But if you've got a teacher who's very, very great communicator and can evoke, your imagination, that's lovely. You go back and remember that when you're older. You see, so the trance helps you remember things and helps you bring about phenomena, healing phenomena, without any of the tricks and all of that stuff.
All right. So basically, you just told us about my first question for you. It's about the difference between regular hypnosis, if I call it, if it's okay to say that, or Ericksonian way. I mean, the Ericksonian way is a lot of using the conversational thing and the indirect ways to get inside, or maybe to evoke or facilitate things in the client, in the patient, for therapy. Is it
That's
correct?
exactly it. That's it. Exactly. Yes.
All right.
Evoking is the right word, rather than, you know, demanding with
Yes.
commands. You're evoking the response, because all those responses occur naturally anyway, even the ones that are really unusual, like arm catalepsy or amnesia. Okay, we can induce those phenomena with indirect suggestions, but we're not doing it to somebody. We're evoking what's naturally there anyway. So that's the important word, evoking.
Yeah, thank you for that. And for my next question, I remember that in your courses, you're not a teacher. You're basically doing therapy demonstration on live with people. So can you tell us a little bit about the mind-body communication?
Well, you know, the whole idea of mind-body communication seems to be a new concept that somehow developed in the 50s and onwards. Prior to the 50s, if you talked about mind-body communication, people would look at you with a blank stare. I'm certain of that. But now we're familiar with the term. And what it's talking about, really, mind-body is not so much the conscious mind communicating with the body. It's the unconscious mind in communication with the body permanently all the time. It doesn't stop. So if you said to somebody, do you know you can actually anesthetize your hand? Or do you know that you can make something like a glass disappear, where when you look at your hand, you won't see the glass, it's invisible? They'll go, what? Now, how's that possible? That's impossible. They'll say it's impossible, but it is impossible if you think of the conscious mind trying to get the body to do that, to anesthetize a hand, or to the eyes not to see something. But when you look at the unconscious mind doing it, the unconscious mind's controlling the body all the time. Every single system of the body, the unconscious mind is monitoring it. And so we can change what the eyes can see, we can change what the ears can hear, all of the sensory experiences we can change. And we can change healing, we can improve healing, we can boost the immune system. So when it comes to mind-body therapy, it's not the person with wishful thinking wanting to try and do it. It's letting go of trying, in fact, consciously, and allowing the unconscious mind to do it for you with the help of a therapist normally.
So basically, when you say the mind-body, the mind, I know that, for instance, here for the Jewish people, we have someone who've been lived 80 years ago, 800 years ago, sorry, which called the Rambam or Maimonides. And he used to know that he was the first of the great doctors of the Jewish people, which resolved this idea of the mind-body communication. And he said that the regular doctor won't be hurry to find things around the body before he see things in the soul, in the mind, in the mental health. So I think that it's that is the communication, the right communication, because if you separate the things, you know, you're using the body as a machine, but it has something inside our body which is out of the range of our consciousness, maybe
out of the range of our conscious mind, but maybe not out of the range of our consciousness. In terms of the unconscious mind, I mean, consciousness is more than just what we see with our conscious mind, which is very limited. In our entire experience, I think that's consciousness. It's beyond just what the conscious mind experiences.
All right. Thank you for that. Next question. What is the most important things that beginners in Ericksonian hypnotherapy must know?
Okay, firstly, if they've been trained in a traditional formal way, they have to forget everything they've learned. Secondly, if you're new to hypnotherapy, congratulate yourself, because you have an open mind then. You don't have to unlearn something.
Yes.
So it's really about being very open, and especially to being open to your understanding of the nature of reality. And let me just explain what I mean by that. You know, that university, Cambridge University experience, I'll tell you what happened. You know, when I was 14, and the psychology lecturer, he took somebody out of the audience up onto the platform, and he put him into hypnosis. And he said, when you open your eyes, I want you to look back at the seat that you were sitting in, and you will see yourself. And you can ask yourself questions, and you'll hear yourself answer. And you can tell me what those answers are. And this is exactly what happened. And I'm just looking at this going, what? What? He's hallucinating himself, sitting in the audience, watching himself on the platform. Okay. So when we talk about the nature of reality, whoever trains in Ericksonian hypnotherapy has to understand that any concept they have about what reality is going to change. It'll open up doors in a new way of thinking, and it can profoundly affect beliefs as well. Because if you think about what's happening there, you start to question yourself, what is happening here? So what am I really experiencing day to day? Am I experiencing what's real, or am I experiencing hallucination? Or is it all illusion? And so you have to have an open mind. So that's the criteria, I think, if you're going to be studying Ericksonian hypnotherapy, because you're entering into this magical world. It's still true of traditional hypnotherapy, of course. But the difference is, with Erickson, you don't have to directly will it or say it to somebody. You can imply it and still get the same results, often better, because the client or the patient doesn't feel they're being told what to do, because it starts to happen from within them. It's like they're experiencing it. They don't quite know why they're experiencing this change. So and secondly, you should enter into Ericksonian hypnotherapy with a very, very serious sense of responsibility for the client and patient, because you are basically controlling the whole thing, and you need to do it with integrity and ethically. So having these tools means you have to do it from the right place, from your heart.
I'm sure that every viewers of this interview with you will be love to hear how you're doing the implication and things like that. So, which brings me to the next question. As I learned with you in your course, you said that in therapy you're using metaphors and analogies, and so Milton Erickson, so how can we improve that skill and maybe combine it with our intuition like you do?
Okay, well, a metaphor is a story, and our ancestry has these wonderful, rich stories. Everybody's history has stories, and there was a time in prehistory where all of our ancestors would sit around a fire in a cave, you know, with a mammoth outside, and we'd be telling each other stories, and they would be ancestral stories, passing on the wisdom of our ancestors. This was how information and survival was maintained, through these stories. So within us, we have a natural interest in hearing stories, number one, and number two, an ability to tell the story. So, you know, as Erickson did, you know, I do the same thing. You know, I will, rather than say to somebody, do this and then do that and you'll be better, I will tell a story about someone else or something else that has that same message. The conscious mind is interested in the actual story as I tell it, the literal meaning of the story, but the unconscious mind picks up the hidden message under the surface of that story. So in a way, you're telling two stories in metaphors. And the same thing applies with analogies. The difference is a metaphor can be imaginary characters. It can be little animals or whatever, be bunny rabbits hopping through a wood or whatever. It could be fairy tales. An analogy is a story about something that's real, or that something that happened to you. So if I tell give an analogy about one of my previous clients or patients, for example, or something that happened to me personally, then that will be an analogy. And the way I collect that stuff is to be open-minded and mindful of quirky, unusual events in day-to-day life. Normally, we just see something a bit unusual, we just walk past. But when you see something unusual, think, is there a teaching potential in that story? How could I use that? Would that be, shall I log that away and then come back to it? You can write it down if you want. I don't do that anymore. You just make a mental note of it. And surprisingly, when you're working with clients then, or patients, what happens often, the story will come up in your mind without you even looking for it as being relevant. And what in terms of doing it intuitively, I've done it, you have to do it, you have to practice doing it. You can't be intuitive about something you've never done. So you have to practice it. But what happens is the unconscious mind of the therapist says, okay, here's a good one. Here's a good analogy or metaphor for you. Say this one. And when that happens, as you may have experienced yourself, you open your mouth and suddenly the words start coming out and you don't know what you're saying. You become a listener of your own story because your unconscious mind is telling the story. And it's a fascinating experience. It's a trance-like experience for the therapist. But it's amazing because your own unconscious has recognized something that will be a valuable resource for that particular patient and their particular problem at that time.
So basically you're using the potential of your unconscious and your learnings and your remembering things in order to do therapy without even your a conscious mind.
Yes.
So it's like a certain of trance.
You mentioned when I teach, I always do demonstrations, right?
Yes.
If you think, I think the course you came on in London was, how many days was that? Do you remember? 8 days or 9 days? Was it something longer than 9 days? Okay. 9 days teaching, 9 days of teaching, 9 days of doing therapy with a group should be quite tiring. But I don't get tired because when I do therapy, I'm not there. If that makes sense. I step out of the way and my unconscious mind does the work and I'm just an observer of it. And then I can talk about it afterwards, of course, because I can replay a video or something like that and I can talk about what happened. And then it's still not tiring because I just notice what I've been doing and talk about it, even though I usually have amnesia immediately after the session. When I play back a video, I can see what I've done and talk about it. But it's not tiring because I'm not doing it. But I think it's the same with anything you're good at. If you're a musician, it's not tiring to improvise or play something beautifully because you become the instrument or you become the music. So you're not having to try. It's happening unconsciously. Anything you do really well, there's no conscious thought.
Yes. Which, by the way, it's the opposite by the point of view of your students, because as a student of yours, if you ask my sister, every day I was very tired and very puzzled in every day. So it was very amusing.
Well, that's because it's new, number one, and you're consciously trying to handle a lot of information.
Yes. Yes.
So it's new.
It's sort of thing. Just
has not yet sunk in at that particular point.
Yes.
So you're having to think about it in order to install it. But once you've installed it and then practiced it as well as you will have experienced, it starts to happen by itself.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. Next question. How the therapist can prevent mistakes in therapy Is there any safe frame for that?
What do you mean
Your
by
experience,
mistakes?
of course. Mistakes, I mean that when the therapists do something that can maybe develop a bad thing in the patient.
Okay, well, first of all, I think a therapist should not be doing therapy if they feel that they might do that. They need to practice a lot more and do exercises with other students before they actually welcome members of the public. I would recommend that. But in terms of mistakes, when, let's say, inducing hypnosis, have you done the right thing? Have you said the right thing? Am I going to break rapport? Is the patient not going to trust me? Is the patient going to say, this is not happening? That is not an issue if you're using Ericksonian hypnotherapy, because Ericksonian hypnotherapy is indirect. So when you start doing the trance induction, the patient doesn't know you've started doing the trance induction.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't work and you're not doing it correctly, the patient doesn't know it's not working. So you haven't made a mistake effectively. You'll be aware that what you're doing is not effective. And what you do then is change what you're doing and do something else, try different techniques. But there's no mistake as such in terms of the patient saying, oh, this is not working. This is you've done this wrong. So it's kind of a risk-free way of doing it. Once you've learned the techniques of Ericksonian hypnotherapy, there's very little risk for the therapist. So it's easy to then become confident in what you do because the patient doesn't really know what you're doing. Anyway.
Yes. And when it comes to therapy or maybe psychotherapy, the way you can influence the patient, is there any safe frame for using therapy or maybe not doing the wrong thing in therapy?
Yeah, and that is basically you're evoking the therapy from within the client. When I do therapy with a client, I do not give instructions. I'm not a counselor. I'm not saying go and do this, go and call this number and get some advice. It's nothing to do with that. I'm evoking a sense of curiosity within the client to notice the changes that I'm implying will happen. Okay. And then I'm engaging the unconscious mind in problem solving to create that situation where the problems are start to resolve by themselves. And that's pretty much true in all therapy that I do. The only time I might be more direct is if the patient stubbornly continues to try and get better in the way that they have been and failing. I then have to get them out of the way, the conscious mind out of the way.
Yes.
But once I start working with the unconscious, I'm not giving instructions. What I'm doing is creating contexts where the client can change because of the context. And that is very much the case if I'm giving tasks. Milton Erickson used to give tasks a lot. Why would you give a client tasks? It's because it puts them into a context where their normal behavior or their problem behavior cannot exist or is affected by the context in some way and thereby brings about the change. So I'm not telling the client what to do, so I can't make a mistake. I'm just evoking a state of change and potential healing within the client by evoking the unconscious mind to be actively involved in that process, often without the client knowing that it's happening or how it's happening. It's not important for the client to know how they're getting better.
Yes. And the way you done it, it's by doing general things and not specific things, right?
Yeah, that's it.
That's the context where the content is governed by the patient, for instance, or the unconscious patient.
Let me give you an example. Okay. Give me an example of a phenomena you want to evoke. Okay, some hypnotic or therapeutic. Tell me something and I'll show you.
Let's say dissociation.
Dissociation. Okay. How would I do that directly and how would I do that indirectly? Okay, directly, I don't use direct hypnosis, but this is what a direct hypnotist would say is, I want you to dissociation. Let's say it's dissociating from your hand. You can't see your hand or something, or you get an anesthesia. Right. I want, in a moment, I'm going to count from 1 to 10, And as I reach the number 10, I want you to notice that you no longer have any feeling in that hand. Okay, very direct, okay? And it will be like 1, feeling more numb, 2, feeling more numb, 3, more numb, 4, more numb, 5, more numb, etc. Okay. To do it indirectly and in a general form, as you said, I would use nominalization. So there's words that don't actually mean anything, but the unconscious understands the meaning because it's related to a specific outcome. So I would say to the client, you know you have a hand, and you know that it's your hand. Sometimes you know you have a hand and you're not aware that it's your hand. How do you do that? And when you're not aware that you have a hand, yet your hand is doing something without you knowing it, who is doing that with your hand if it's not you? I wonder which part of you is controlling the hand, whether it's the warmth, the heaviness, the sensitivity, or it's the coolness, the lightness, or the numbness. If you're not doing that, how is that happening right now? And get something a little bit more direct there. So, and you know, other times in your life, you've had the experience of not feeling quite as if you were somewhere. Maybe you closed your eyes for a little bit and your mind has wandered and you know you're sitting in the chair, but somehow you don't feel like you are sitting in the chair. Okay. So you see what we're doing, we're evoking the dissociation rather than commanding it. Because if you command, imagine if you're commanding it in a therapeutic context, you know, your hand's getting numb now, getting numb, 1, 2, 3, 4. And they say, well, actually, no, it's nothing, it's not nothing. Okay. You basically have done such a disservice to that patient because you've broken rapport. They don't believe in the therapist anymore. You're not going to be able to help them from that point onwards. So if you do it indirectly, you see it's much more permissive and casual. And so it starts to happen by itself. And the client accepts it, you know, as being something that's happening in the moment rather than something being done to them.
By using the last memory or maybe inner reality for that?
Yeah, you're calling on the client's experience all the time.
Yes.
But the part of the experience related to the phenomena or outcome that you want to evoke.
That you want.
So if it was amnesia, it would be something different. Okay, amnesia is a little similar to dissociation, of course, because you can't access the memory. So there's dissociation between conscious mind and the actual memory. Yes. But you would, whatever the phenomena you're producing, hallucination, in hallucination, you give a story about how you thought you saw something that wasn't there, and you realize it was just a shadow of something. Mm-hmm. So you're starting to evoke that phenomena from within the memory and then directing it towards whatever you then want to do in terms of hallucination.
By the way, the way that you've done it right now with the dissociation is by dissociate between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, and his phenomena of way of dealing with that experiences. That all right, beautiful, amazing. Thank you for that. One of the most important thing that I learned from you, which is not familiar maybe with the Ericksonian way, is that the compassionate way of you doing things. And I'm sure that if we observe or maybe look about Erickson, there is still a compassionate, but we cannot learn it from books or things like that. So you're basically the resource for that now. So my question is, how love and compassion change your work with patients?
Oh, it changed it dramatically. But I had to reach a tipping point in my career in order to allow that to happen. When I was teaching in the 80s and 90s, it was mainly hospitals and universities I was teaching in. So the idea of talking about compassion and love then was a bit strange. People didn't kind of hang on to that pretty, you know, at the time it was something quite new and a little bit kind of 1960s hippie stuff. So they didn't really accept that. So I didn't go that direction. But after I came to live in Thailand and started to look at how I could develop my compassionate side, mainly through Buddhism, in this case, it can be done through any faith. I do believe that. Then I realized that there was a way of utilizing compassion and loving kindness and non-attachment to oneself as a way of enhancing my work with Ericksonian hypnotherapy. And so that's what I decided to focus on. And it became such an integral part of what I do. In fact, let's just talk about Erickson for a moment. In the 1940s and 50s, what was the principle that motivated Erickson at the time? Although he was compassionate, it wasn't about people being compassionate and loving each other. It was about following the American dream, going to university and getting engaged, getting married, having 2 children, taking care of the parents and grandparents, having that house with the 2 cars. That was the kind of criteria by which the benchmark by which he measured success. And so his attitude was to get everybody back on the straight and narrow, basically on that path. And so the big difference is that I use Ericksonian techniques, language patterns, and skills and tools, but the criteria is different now. It's about the individual, and we live in a society and a culture now where so many other things have to be considered in terms of gender, sexuality, all this, everything we have to include. And so we can't say this is the way to do it. We have to say, you are the way to do it. And my job is to facilitate that.
So when you're doing therapy today, or maybe a lot of other things, you do it through compassion and love. I mean, this is your glass that.
Yeah, it has to be. I mean, think about this. I mean, if you on your deathbed and you look back and you thought, I could have done a better job of this. I've been a therapist all my life, but I didn't care enough. I was more interested in the money, for example, okay? Or I knew I could actually do a better job, but didn't. That would be a horrible feeling. However successful you'd been, to think that when you're on your deathbed. So for me, I'm scared. I don't want to have that feeling. So being very selfish, I want to be very compassionate, because I do believe that if the therapist can perceive the client as being the most important person in their life during those therapy sessions, then the therapist will give 100%. And so it's a mindset. It's a frame you place around the work and say, right, I can't give anything less than 100% when I'm with this client. And how do you do that? Not just through learning new techniques, etc. It has to come from the heart.
Yes.
And so often a patient or client will not have had that kind of attention before, and somebody really caring at a deep, deep level. That itself is therapeutic.
I must say that when I thought about this question of the compassionate, and because I was a student of yours, it's very important and very valuable resource that I learned from you in therapy, which also changed my work with patients.
Good.
And generally with people outside, even to the nature.
Yes, that's it. You see, being a compassionate, caring therapist doesn't stop when the client leaves the room.
Yes.
Because if it does, you're putting on an act. Once you're doing something that works, the brain says, oh, this is good. It wants to do more of it. So it'll change your life in society, with your friends, family, with people you meet in the supermarket. It'll change your interactions. And that's a wonderful thing, because that's, that you then become conditioned to a new way of interacting with people.
Definitely. It changed my identity in a spiritual way, if you can say that.
Well, it will do. It will do. Because what is love? What is love? there are two kinds of love, right? There's the love which is me, 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 me. I want love. I want love. So I'm going to say I love you because guess what? I want it back.
Yes.
We're not
To be
talking
loved.
about that. We're talking about unconditional love. And this is where it becomes spiritual, because unconditional love is the love you give without any expectation of return. You're
Yes.
still kind of doing it for yourself because doing it makes you feel good, but not because they give love back. It's just because you know you're giving something that makes a wonderful difference to the lives of others.
Yes, true words. Yeah, definitely. All right, you spoke before about the metaphors and analogies, which I think that there is a kind base of suggestion for that. So I wonder, and this is my next question, is there any difference between the suggestions between direct, indirect, permissive, or is there any better one?
Well, permissive is the same as indirect in terms of terminology, in terms of Ericksonian terminology. The thing about indirect is it's not saying something to the client that will mismatch their criteria or what they believe. Being direct can mismatch someone's belief system because you're giving your own opinion or belief to that person if you're being direct. So when you're being indirect, there's less likelihood of rejection of what you're saying. There's less likelihood of lack of trust or breaking rapport. Because you're being indirect, you're evoking from within rather than making something happen from outside. The client is more likely to respond. A person is more likely to respond on their own good idea if they've thought about it rather than someone else telling them. Okay, so this is what we're doing. We're evoking that good idea, if you like, from within the client. So the nature of suggestion is very different, you know, for direct and indirect. But as I said, permissive is the same as indirect.
I'm asking that because a lot of people that will hear that maybe can wonder to themselves, is there any manipulation on that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's important. It's important. You know, you are manipulating the client's conscious state in order for them to get better.
Yes.
So what kind of manipulation is that? It's creating a place where they can experience changes happening from within themselves with their own mind, creating those changes.
Yes.
What does a chiropractor do? Manipulates. Osteopath manipulates. Okay. But what determines its purpose is, sorry, what determines its value is its purpose. Who is it for? Are you manipulating somebody for your own benefit? Or are you manipulating someone for their benefit? So the terminology, the word manipulation, of course, means making a difference through some kind of intervention, but it's the reason you do it that determines whether it's good or bad.
The last interview was with Rob McNally, and when I said the word suggestion, he said, "Oh, hi, I don't like the terminology, the term suggestion. I like to reframe it to invitation.
Yeah,
I invite the patient to do something for his benefit, not for."
That's exactly what we're doing. Yes.
Yes, yes, definitely. One last question. Can we ensure ourselves or maybe to patients a long-lasting change?
We should do. And many of us don't. And we could easily rectify that. Now, so many hypnotherapists are trained to fix problems as if they were car mechanics, you know. And therapy is much more than fixing a problem. When you fix a problem, there's always a consequence of that. So if somebody stops smoking, if someone loses weight, if someone gains confidence, if someone stops stuttering, if someone stops bedwetting, whatever, there's always a change in that person's life. So an important part of therapy is actually spending time on the consequences of getting better. And that's fairly rare. It's not taught that often. But for me, I would say if you take a therapeutic hour, the first 20 minutes, 30 minutes is fixing the problem. The rest is all about how their life will be different in the future as a result of that. Yes. And that achieves two things. Firstly, it actually gets the client to start projecting the benefits of the change, of changing the problem. And that becomes like a rehearsal of the future. So that becomes like a huge hypnotic suggestion anyway, because they're in an altered state. And secondly, what it does, it reinforces the success of the therapy. Because if the client is imagining or visualizing themselves doing something they couldn't do before, it means the therapy must have worked.
Yes.
Right? So it works both ways. So when you spend time with the client going into the future, seeing future context, how is this now going to change your life, for example, that kind of question. You're doing those two things. You're rehearsing a positive future, but you're also implying through the fact that they're visualizing it, that the therapy has been successful. So it compounds the success of the therapy.
Yes. And do you think that this technique or maybe attitude of yours about the lasting change can resolve the patient for wanting for more therapies or more sessions?
It depends. It depends. You know, if a client's coming to you with several particular problems, they're rarely unrelated. Usually they're connected in some way. And so what if I can do, I will kind of deal with as many as I can with the same metaphors and analogies and language patterns. Or you might find there's one particular problem, which if you resolve that one, the others automatically disappear.
Yes.
Like if you have a row of dominoes. Yeah. So, you know, you push the first domino down, when they push the first domino down, it runs and they have all these symptoms or problems. So if you take out the third domino, so the first one, the second one fall down, but then the third one's not there. So the rest of it can't run. So I kind of work strategically as well with clients. So to see what's the process, the structure behind their problem. I'm more interested in what maintains a problem than what's caused it. Because it's the brain running the pattern, the programming, if you like, that still causes the problem and the suffering. So what's caused it is back there. We can save a lot of time by not focusing on digging up all kinds of history, but just looking at how the brain is maintaining that problem in some way regarding the synaptic connections in the brain, the hardwiring that's been done earlier. So a lot of my work is based on that as well.
And I think also, from my opinion, of course, and from my experience, that there isn't such a thing perfection with therapy, because a lot of times you can do maybe only reorientation to general and future experiences.
Mm-hmm.
You think that it's
you need to know something of the client or the patient. You know, if you don't, you need the unconscious mind to become actively involved in creating the map of their future, even if they don't share it with the client or with the therapist. You get the agreement of the unconscious mind that it's creating a map in terms of the patient's overall health, happiness, and well-being. That's the kind of framework you place around it: health, happiness, and well-being. So everything, all the decisions have to be based on that.
Yes,
without you saying what they are.
Yes, I'm saying that because from my reading about the books of Milton Erickson and his work, all the metaphors and the stories about him, not always he could gain 100% perfection of therapy. Sometimes he just changed the point of view of things in his psychotherapy, or the meanings or the interpretation of things, which not necessarily dealing with the problem itself, but around her.
Yeah, there are two kinds of results from therapy. One is change, one is improvement.
Yes.
And Erickson would always go for something as long as it was improvement of some kind, not necessarily a dramatic change, but a step in the right direction, a new perception of their situation and what their problem's about, which would then have a knock-on effect after they'd left the therapy. I think it's like getting the ball rolling, as they say, you know, getting that momentum.
Yes, the snowball.
Yeah, yes, it's important to have the momentum in therapy. When the client leaves, you know, the therapy doesn't stop when they leave the session. The therapy continues between sessions or after the session for however long. And so you have to create that momentum. And especially when you think about what you're doing is not just fixing problems, you're transforming lives. So the momentum has to carry through for the rest of their life. Yes. And I see that as my responsibility. It may sound arrogant to say that, but it's really saying I've got this opportunity to spend an hour or however many with this person. I don't want to do anything less than 100% to make them happy and have a great life. So part of that is creating that momentum.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for that. One last thing I want to highly recommend it. Your book is amazing. I learned a lot about the techniques, the principles, the way you spoke, the things around things, and maybe the termination of things. And also I said that it's volume 1, so this is a series. So can you tell us about it a little bit?
Okay, well, that particular book, it has a subtitle there, which is Phobias. Okay.
Yes.
The publisher got it wrong. The subtitle should say language. It should say hypnotic language. But misunderstood that the book was about phobias because we use a phobia case study as an example. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's not actually about phobias. It's actually about hypnotic language, as you'll appreciate now if you've read it already.
Yes. Yes.
The second book, which is almost finished, is about metaphors and tasking. And we do another case study. The case study is obsessive compulsive behavior. To look at that. There was going to be a third one, but that might be about depression, but I'm not sure whether we'll go ahead with that. I don't know. And there's some other things I'm doing writing wise. I'm writing a book on non-attachment therapy with an Indian doctor who's a very spiritual man. And we're doing that together. And also a psychotherapist in Germany who is writing a book on principles with me. Together we're writing a book on principles. So we're hoping to cover everything, you know, with the language, tasking and metaphors, then principles, and then the spiritual aspect with the non-attachment therapies. There's a lot is happening at the moment. And I'm teaching a lot more than I used to as well, so which is nice.
Yes, and then if you had this opportunity for all the viewers, how can viewers or students attend or participate in your courses?
Well, because of lockdown, all my teaching is online, naturally, as it is with many people, and I'm enjoying that much more, to be honest, you know, because I don't have to jump on a plane and go and fly to another country and stay there for a couple of weeks or months even. So yeah, we have a website, which is britishhypnosisresearch.com. So, or just type in Stephen Brooks hypnosis into Google, and or hypnosis techniques. Just type in hypnosis techniques. We come up #1 on Google for that. You know, which is nice. An organic search is just very nice that we've got that position. So it's easy to find.
Maybe when I upload this interview with you, I can share a link. Of your.
That would be very nice.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I appreciate and acknowledge everything and a lot of things in you, around you. I love you very much. I think that you know.
Me too.
It.
I love you too.
Yes.
Unconditional.
So thank you. Definitely. Definitely. Thank you for helping me learn a lot about Milton Erickson and therapy and psychotherapy and a lot of other things
in my
life.
The important thing is you're doing it for the right reasons.
Yes.
Because you don't just want to help people like clients and patients. You want other people to learn from you and make a difference. And that is so special, because one day you better look back and think, I've helped the lives of so many people I'll never meet, but it doesn't matter. I know I made a difference in some way. That's going to be such an amazing feeling. So
I
support
wanted
you
to be
fully.
there. I wanted to be there. Thank you. And you're an inspiration and a vivid legend, like I love to say.
Okay. Thank you, Hi.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you. Yes. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.